Welcome into Wednesday's ESPN FC Live. We've got a full house for you. Steve Nicol, Mark Ogden, and Rob Dawson for us. And we're going to continue something that's been in the headlines, chatting about Marcus Rashford. Spurs against Man United tomorrow in the League Cup. Will he be involved? We'll talk about that and plenty other things to get to as well. Specifically, the chunk of this show will be about Manchester United and Marcus Rashford. I want to start with Rob. How did we get to this situation with the interview that Marcus Rashford gave to Henry Winter over the past couple of days, saying that probably time for him to move on? Why do you think it's come to this, Rob?
Well, there's been a sort of a steady breakdown between Man United and Marcus Rashford for a while now. There was hope that when he signed his new contract in 2023 that would kind of signal the start of him maybe kicking on and realising that undoubted potential. But for whatever reason, and there are a lot of different reasons, that hasn't really happened. There's been frustration among lots of the fans about some of his performances, some of his body language. Obviously, you have a situation at the weekend where Ruben Amorim drops in from the squad for what is a massive game at Man City, really making a statement to Marcus himself and also to the rest of the players that, if you don't train in the right way, you don't impress me in training, you're just not going to play. And then 2 days later, you get Marcus Rashford doing what looks to be a relatively impromptu interview where he says for the first time, really, that he thinks it's maybe time for him to leave Man United, a club that he's had an association with for the last 20 years. People have suggested for a while now that he looks like a player who needs a fresh start. And that really is Marcus confirming that he thinks that he's better off now elsewhere and away from Man United.
Stevie, as a former player, do you look at Marcus Rashford in a game these days and think he's giving everything for the cause?
I think there's been occasions when you could point the finger and say that he maybe isn't quite as invested as he should be. At the same time,
one or two issues, I think, with Stevie's mic. So we'll get that sorted. Oggy, when you look at Rashford and the way he's kind of carried himself, but you look at all the things that he's done off the field as well, you want to have sympathy for his plight, but can you have sympathy for the way things are going on? And when you get dropped from a squad, there must be a reason for that. Can you have any sympathy at all for Marcus Rashford here?
Well, yeah, on a human level, you have to have sympathy. If there's something going on in Marcus Rashford's life that people aren't aware of, and I'm not suggesting there is, but we don't know. You have to have sympathy for the fact that he's a guy that is doing what most people would love to do. He's on a fortune doing it, and he's not happy. So, if that's the case, then yeah, of course you have some sort of sympathy as a human being. But from a football perspective, it's different. I think from a football perspective, he's in danger of kind of throwing it all away. He's only 27, he should be in the peak of his career. Well, if you look at his statistics in the last 4 seasons, apart from that spike after the World Cup in Qatar when he ended the season with 30 goals, he's not been in double figures. His career has really plateaued, and as it goes on, increasingly, it looks like he's not enjoying himself. He's not putting the work in. The amount of times we've seen Marcus Rashford in a game where he's supposed to be pressing the defender, and he's not even jogging. He's kind of walking and just, if he had pockets in his shorts, he'd have his hands in his pockets. That's how kind of lame he's looked at times. But it's down to him, really. We can make all the excuses in the world. He can say that there's been a lot of upheaval at Man United. This is his 6th manager now, I think, Ruben Amorim, since he got into the first team. He's not the greatest players around him at times. That the squad hasn't been a Man United quality squad for a lot of that time. But still, you can't make those excuses. At the start of his career, he looked like a real star of the future, and he's flatlined. And I think that's down to him as much as anybody else. So sympathy, yes, from a human level, but from a football perspective, a sporting perspective, he really is in danger of throwing it all away. And by saying he wants a new challenge, he probably has to be careful what he wishes for, because there's not a lot of interest out there for Marcus Rashford right now.
There's only a certain number of clubs that could afford him and might be interested in signing him. We'll get to that shortly. Stevie's back. He's taken the gremlins outside, giving them a seeing to. Hopefully everything is fine now. We were just talking, Stevie, about having sympathy for Marcus Rashford on a personal level, but maybe not necessarily as a footballer. Hopefully you'll be able to to kind of elaborate on what you said before, the technical issues about him sometimes trying and sometimes appearing not to be giving 100%.
Well, I'm not so sure we should have too much sympathy for him as a football player. You know, the fact is that this is his 10th season, as I was saying, and he's had 2 really good seasons. 2. You know, we're not talking here about George Best or Bobby Charlton or somebody like that. So the fact is that Marcus Rashford's a lucky boy. You know, I think part of the mystique about Rashford is Manchester United have struggled for so long that it's kind of hinged on how he's performed in terms of goal scoring. And so I think the fact that he's getting so much attention is all about how poor United have been and not so how brilliant he's been. As I said, this is his 10th season. Think about it. This is his 10th season and he's had 2 really good seasons. The rest have been average or below par. So I'm not sure sympathy is the right word for Marcus Rashford. He's sitting on a contract right now where he might want to go, but nobody's going to take him, is all he said. And why would you take him? Why would you take somebody at that sort of money? And I don't believe that he's going to take a pay cut. So he's going to be at United for a lot longer than he hopes for. You know, turning around and saying, "Oh, I think I need a new challenge." I'll tell you what, I need a new challenge as well. Think Sky Sports are covered for me? I don't think so.
Couldn't afford you. No chance. When you look at when you look at the way Marcus Rashford is right now, Rob, and Stevie's just said that there. Who's going to take him right now with the form that he's been in? Are you taking a leap of faith for any club that wants to get him and add him to the squad, that you'll be getting the good Marcus Rashford and not the Marcus Rashford that's led to where we are right now?
Well, and that's exactly right. You know, Oggy and Stevie there have spoken about Marcus's contract, and you know, on more than 350 grand a week for the next 3.5 years is one thing. That's a major stumbling block for any club looking to sign him. The other problem is that just on a sporting level or a football level, is he really worth the punt? Well, there's not really been, as Stevie has pointed out, there's not really been enough evidence over the last 10 years to suggest that major clubs should be looking at him anyway, even if his wages and a potential transfer fee weren't a problem. So there are 2 issues there. It's all well and good Marcus saying, well, I want a new challenge. I would venture that the timing of this isn't particularly great given we're halfway through a season anyway. But anyway, aside from that, who's going to take him? You've probably got a handful of clubs in the world who could even begin to afford him. PSG are one of those who have said privately that they aren't particularly interested. Real Madrid are another. Well, they've got some of the best attacking players in the world. No one at Real Madrid is looking at Marcus Rashford and saying, "Oh, this is the guy that we need to play next to Vinicius Junior and Kylian Mbappe." Well, where else do you go? You begin to start looking at Premier League options. Well, again, he hasn't really done it enough consistently over the years in the Premier League to warrant the likes of Man City or Arsenal or Liverpool even looking at him, because they all have better players. So it's one thing Marcus saying, "Oh, I want a new challenge," and expecting to click his fingers and just a club materialise out of nothing. Stevie's exactly right. He may find that there is no market for him, and he was told that in the summer. United were more than willing to listen to offers for him in the summer, and he was told though that there was a very, very small market for you, and nothing ever materialised. United didn't even get one phone call in the summer, and I imagine there are United bosses sat there listening or reading that interview, thinking, "Well, this is the same again. We're not going to get phone calls in January. We're not going to get phone calls at the end of next season because your wages are a massive problem, and also your form is a problem."
Oggy, one of the teams that Rob's just mentioned, and he's right, there aren't many that could afford him, is Manchester City. Mm-hmm. Now, I read an article, Martin Samuel in the Times this morning, and it was a hypothetical article. 14 players have swapped Manchester United for City or vice versa since the Second World War, the last of which was Carlos Tevez in 2009. Is it total pie in the sky? Because Pep's said in the past that he admires Marcus Rashford, but that was probably when he had one of his good 2 seasons that Stevie mentioned. So is this even something that we should visit? Is it a complete non-starter? And what would the reaction be like in Manchester if Marcus Rashford decided that he was off to City?
Well, there are different strands to that question mark. So let's do them one by one. So first of all, it is right that Pep Guardiola has had an admiration for Marcus Rashford. I was told that by somebody at City 2-3 years ago that he was the one player that he could take from United, but that was 2-3 years ago. And Pep Guardiola's got plenty of problems right now, and I'm not sure an out of form winger who has had a few issues off the pitch is what he wants to sort it out. So I think it would be an extreme punt to suggest he's going to go to Man City, but how would it be taken in Manchester? I think the Man United fans, the majority would be glad to see the back of him, but I'm not sure they want to see him go to Man City just in case he turns out to be the Marcus Rashford that they thought he would be and that never became. So City fans, I guess, would take it as, Marcus Rashford in a Man City shirt. He's always said he's a Man United fan. I just don't see how it works. I just don't see how, in any shape or form, that Marcus Rashford to Man City. Look, City could afford the wages, but why would they pay him? Why would they make him one of their best paid players when he's not really earned it? So, yes, Pep Guardiola likes him as a player. He's got pace. He can score a goal. Not as many as people think, but no. If he goes to Man City, that shows that Man City are in a bigger problem than they actually think they're in right now.
Stevie, if you're sitting in the United dressing room and there are no clubs in for Rashford, and it becomes pretty clear his only option is to stay put, is he welcomed back in with open arms? Having said what he said, how would you have reacted to someone like Marcus Rashford back when you were in the dressing room at Anfield?
Well, I think this hinges on, we've been talking about, was he given enough? Was he given 100%? It's difficult from the outside looking in. You're kind of guessing, but the guys in the dressing room, they know exactly whether he's given 100% or not. And if he's not been given 100%, they'll be absolutely delighted that he wants to go, because there will be the majority of players in that dressing room that don't want to be in a Man United team that are looked upon as failures right now. They want to succeed. They want to do well. They want to win games, and they know that they need everybody. And if you've got a guy who may or may not be standing next to you on the field and you can't rely on him or trust him, I don't think there's one of those players in the United dressing room that will bat an eyelid if Marcus Rashford goes out the door. But as I said, the key is if he's they will know better than we will. We can look at it and say he's been walking and all of those things that we have said. But as I said, the guys in the dressing room will 100% know whether he's giving it all or not. And as I said, if I'm one of those players and I think somebody next to me is not doing it and not giving it, and he comes out and makes a statement like that, I'll be more than glad to see him walk out the door. Absolutely no danger.
Rob, we talk a lot about players having a lot of power in football, but when a player has signed a contract with a football club, with a company, until 2028, it's the club that's got all the power. So regardless, if there is interest in him, do you think their last resort would be to sell him to a Premier League club, a rival? Would they want to see him go abroad? Of course they would. But if it's only an option to move to the Premier League, whether it's City, Chelsea, Newcastle, whoever, is that something they might say, you know what, we'll just keep what we have rather than strengthening a rival?
Well, I think that probably depends on what Rashford's attitude is. Because you're right, United are probably looking at this and thinking, well, where would we, if he has to go, where do we want him to go? We want him to go abroad. We want a club to take all of his wages, but wave goodbye, shake hands and say, thanks very much, see you later. But if that's not an option, then you start having to look at where else he might go. Well, clearly they don't want him to go to a Premier League rival, because as Marcus just said, you don't want a situation where Marcus Rashford suddenly becomes a player we all thought he would be at Arsenal, Liverpool or Man City, because that would be incredibly embarrassing. It depends really on Rashford's attitude. If he is happy to have a conversation with Amrim and Jason Wilcox and Omar Barada at United and say, I really want to get if there's nowhere for me to go, I'm happy to get my head down and work really hard and try and get himself back in the team, that's fine. But if he's going to be a problem in the dressing room or on the training pitch, then that forces Man United's hands. And we saw that with Jadon Sancho. I'm sure that United did not want Jadon Sancho playing for Chelsea, but they were forced into that situation because they had no other option. They couldn't, or they decided they just couldn't have Sancho around the training ground anymore. And they had to swallow something that they probably didn't want to do. Well, a fully focused, fully fit, fiery Marcus Rashford is an asset to Man United, but he has to be focused and he has to be training properly. The issue is it's all down to Marcus. You talk about the club having the power because he's on such a long contract. The way this goes from now is all down to Marcus Rashford.
Augie, we had the situation with Jadon Sancho, and him and Erik ten Hag had a falling out, and it was never going to work. Could we have a similar situation, not so much a falling out, whereby we have spent exactly 15 minutes talking about a player who wasn't even in the Manchester United squad for the derby at the weekend because he was omitted by Ruben Amorim? So would it be in United's best interest, if they don't get someone to buy him, to send him out on loan till the end of the season, potentially with a view to a purchase? Because right now, he seems to be making a lot of noise following this interview, and it's probably noise that Ruben Amorim could do without.
Yeah, I think Ruben Amorim's smarter than Erik ten Hag. I think Erik ten Hag kind of clumsily handled the Sancho situation, and it ended up being a bad situation for him, for United, and Sancho in the end. So I think Amorim is cleverer than that. I think Amorim's comments today actually showed that he's in control of the situation, because rather than saying that he was really disappointed in Marcus Rashford and he's angry with him, he said, "Oh no, he's still got a future here. His big challenge can be at this club." So he's playing the game in a very astute manner, Ruben Amorim. So I think he's keeping the control on his side and the club side. Now, would a loan work for United? Possibly. I think, I wrote a piece this week about his possible options, and the Bundesliga could be an option in the sense that, Jadon Sancho revived his career at Borussia Dortmund last year, but you're really only looking at Borussia Dortmund and Bayern Munich, who could actually, one, pay the wages, and two, attract a player, even of Marcus Rashford's lack of form, of his standing right now. I don't really see Bayern Munich taking him, unless United think that they could take Leroy Sané, Alphonso Davies, or Joshua Kimmich, who are all out of contract next summer, as part of a deal. But we're getting kind of sidetracked there. But I do think that you can't forget that there's always a way back. I've seen this situation before. Wayne Rooney twice looked like he was out of the door at Man United. He fell out with Alex Ferguson twice. They turned that around, and famously, Rooney put a statement out on the day of a game once, said he wanted to leave. So Marcus Rashford is kind of following the Wayne Rooney path, and Carlos Tevez at Man City, he looked like he was never going to play for them again after finally get Roberto Mancini, but he came back and helped them win the title. So there's always a way back. And I think Rashford, to be fair, the best option to him right now is to stay at Man United. It's not to leave. The best option is to stay there, get his head down, because if it turns out to be stay at Man United or go to Saudi Arabia, then if he thinks Saudi Arabia is a better option than playing for Man United, then he might as well go to Saudi Arabia now.
I think the Rooney one is probably not the best example, because you're dealing with a different animal.
Yeah.
I was talking about the dressing room, what they think about Rashford. Now, whether Rooney fell out with Fergie or not, the only thing the dressing room knows is that Wayne Rooney's coming in every day and going to work as hard as anybody else in that dressing room, regardless of whether he's arguing with Fergie, regardless of whether he's saying he wants to go away. I mean, there wasn't a blip in Rooney's performances after he said he wanted to go away. There wasn't a blip in his training. So I think unfortunately for Rashford, we're talking about a different animal here. I don't know whether you saw the show last night. I thought Frank Leboeuf absolutely nailed it. He was talking about how Rashford, his attitude and the way he thought about how he was as a kid and how he's looked after the other kids, and he's got his MBE because he's remembered his past, and his desire and his will to do well has come from his past. Well, if he could only do that with his football career, then he'd be top of the tree. But that's the problem. So, this is nothing else other than Marcus Rashford putting himself in his position. It's nothing to do with all the managers. It's nothing to do with anybody else. This is Marcus Rashford, who's got his big deal, his big contract, and it looks like, from the outside, his down tools.
Just on that, Mark, I just think it's a fair point that using Marcus Rashford's, his charity work, his off-field work, and that, it's great. And what he did in the pandemic for feeding school kids was amazing.
Absolutely,
but a lot of footballers do that sort of thing without any publicity. Loads. So they have foundations, they do charity work, they go to hospitals, do all sorts of things. And 9 times out of 10, there's no publicity for that. So I don't think we should put Marcus Rashford on a pedestal that he's the only footballer that does that. He's not. He's just one of many. Credits him for doing it, but I think that the PR advice that he's getting is not the best right now. I think everything he does is a disaster, really. It just makes things worse. So I think they should kind of tone down on the Marcus Rashford being a saint and just say, look, he's just an old lad. He's a footballer that's lost his way a little bit, and let's just try and get him back on track the best way possible, rather than paint him out something that he's not.
Stevie, if you were in charge at United, which obviously is never going to happen, but you had to deal with a situation like this, would your way of dealing with it be similar to Ruben Amorim? Or what would you do differently if you have a player maybe you've had in the past? Maybe you've seen that when you've been in the change room at Liverpool, someone who was maybe on their way out and then came back in. How would you deal with it?
Well, I agree with Augie that Amorim absolutely is dealing with this perfectly well. He absolutely looks as though he's in control of the situation. However, when you have a problem in the dressing room, it affects everybody. And as I said, Rooney's a one-off. But to me, this Rashford scenario absolutely is going to affect the rest of the dressing room. And so, you know what? When you got a problem, if you can cut it off, then do it. And so all the talk, if you can get him out on loan, at the end of the day, the guy's not performing. Mm-hmm. And he's not going to be performing anytime soon by the looks of it. So get him out the door. And if you have to send him to another Premier League club and they pay half his wages, then for a club that right now is trying to build a kitty, who are saving money, I'm assuming, they're making all these cuts to try and build up some sort of finances where they can actually go and get some more players, because that's what they need. At the end of the day, the players they have aren't good enough, and they need a kitty to go and strengthen the squad, and they need more than a couple. And so if you can get this guy out the door, out the dressing room, it's one less problem. Absolutely, 100%, one less problem. You gain financially, and you can concentrate on what's happening in front of you and what's going on in the only thing that any football club or any proper football club should be doing, every single thing they do should be geared towards a Saturday afternoon or wherever it is or whenever it is when the kickoff's on. Every single thing should be pointing towards that. And having a guy like Rashford hanging around the dressing room, making comments and everybody talking about it while he's not producing or not even playing or not even in the squad is just a problem. So you know what? You got a problem, cut it off and get rid of it.
Before we wrap this up, one final question to Rob about Marcus Rashford. I mentioned right at the start that Man United go to Spurs in the League Cup on Thursday. What have you heard today with regards to whether or not he may or may not be involved in that game, both from an ESPN FC perspective or fellow colleagues? What's being said in the Northwest right now?
Well, we saw Ruben Amorim this morning at Carrington, and he said that he hadn't spoken to Marcus Rashford yet about that interview. He said that he was going to wait until after training today to decide whether Marcus Rashford and Alejandro Garnacho, who's also dropped from the squad for the City game, would travel down to London for the game against Spurs on Thursday. Well, there's been a suggestion that Garnacho is part of the squad that's travelling to London, and that Marcus Rashford possibly may not. Amorim said this morning that Rashford had trained really, really well on Sunday when he wasn't picked for that City game. He was sent home from training on Monday because he had illness, but we're still waiting till after training today to decide whether Rashford would play or not. It looks right now as if Marcus Rashford hasn't travelled to the game against Spurs. We'd obviously have to wait to speak to Amorim again to find out whether that's a fitness thing, whether he's still unwell, or whether it's a disciplinary thing. Because as we said earlier in the show, the one thing that you know for a fact is that Amorim will be absolutely furious about all of this. He's got enough problems to deal with as it is, without having to deal with players coming out 2 days before a game telling everyone that they want to leave.
There's a lot of talking points across Europe right now in various countries. Barcelona were going great guns and aren't doing so great. That's in Spain. Bayern Munich losing at Mainz at the weekend in the Bundesliga. But one thing that's certainly gathered plenty of traction is Chelsea and what they're doing in the Premier League. And Stevie, I like the way that Enzo Maresca is handling this one. At the start, he was just like, hey, come on, let's get on with it. We're not title challengers. Now he says, okay, well, people make us title challengers. Well, if that's the case, we're just going to enjoy it. At which stage does it become extremely serious? And is he saying to the press the same as he's saying behind the scenes to the players? They are title challengers, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, they've put themselves in a position where they're challenging for the title, and you can't hide from that. At the end of the day, if you're the coach, anybody worth their salt, particularly with as young a group of players as he has, is going to play it down and just talk about playing the next game. which is what you should do. And actually, that's the way to do it. That's the way you should do it. But yeah, they've got themselves in a position where they are competing for the title. And now is when we will find out how far down the line they are. We've seen the performances, and the performances have suggested that they are title contenders. Now the mental side of it comes in. When you're at the top of the tree and the pressure changes, for me, up until now, they've had a free run at it. The fact that they've been doing well, everybody's like, wow, we didn't see this coming. Pre-season, we would never have guessed that they were going to be in the position they are right now. However, they are in the position right now to compete for the title. And so the pressure changes. So now when they drop points and make mistakes, then the pressure is ramped up. Everybody starts talking about what they're not doing as opposed to right now. All we're talking about right now is how great they are going forward, and they're great to watch, and I love the way they attack, and Nicholas Jackson is scoring goals. I mean, in particular, is Nicholas Jackson going to be able to handle it when the pressure is on him now to take all these chances? As I said, I think that up until now, they've had a free run at it. And I think the goalposts are going to be moved very shortly, and there'll be a different pressure on them. And then we'll see whether they really are title contenders.
Okay, I'm looking at their next 8 games before they face Manchester City on the 25th of January. They're going to be favourites to win them all. Now, that's all competitions. You've got the Conference League, you've got the FA Cup, you've got other competitions as well. But they're league games. I mean, they've got a trip to Everton coming up, but they've got some very, very winnable games. Is this just something you ride the crest of a wave if you're Chelsea? And as Stevie's talking about, the pressure is going to be amped up once they get tested. Well, just go out and do their things with a kind of just, hey, laissez-faire approach.
Do you know something? Everything that Stevie said then, you could also apply to Liverpool as well, because nobody saw it coming for Liverpool this season. Yes, they got more experience, but Arne Slot was coming in to replace Jurgen Klopp, and it was going to be a season transition. So they've also had a free hit. Everyone's had a free hit because Man City and Arsenal have been way off the pace. So I think there are questions to be asked of both Liverpool and Chelsea right now. But obviously, Liverpool have got the pedigree with Salah, with Van Dijk, with Alisson when he's back in the team. But who knows? I mean, I think everyone questioned Leicester back in 2016 that the naivety would come into play. They'd start feeling the pressure. They never did. And I think the one thing about Chelsea is because they're such a young team, they seem to be enjoying themselves. And they haven't got the senior players in the squad. Sometimes senior players obviously bring experience, but sometimes they also bring that sense of like, this could go wrong because it's gone wrong for them before. Bad experiences also have an impact. The Chelsea players are just loving it right now. And they've probably got, if not the best player in the Premier League, they've got one of the best in Cole Palmer. So I think Chelsea could be this season's Leicester. I just think they've got momentum right now, and they're a club that is used to winning things. And they've got that mentality around the club, around the fan base. So I think Liverpool are favourites, but I think Chelsea could push them all the way.
Let's end with Manchester City. We started with Manchester United. Is the dynasty over, or dynasty, as they say in the United States, Augie, or is it far too early to write off a Pep side who's got a January transfer window to come and might be doing some moves?
No, I think it's over. I think it's over in the shape that we know it. You look at that team. You've got De Bruyne and Gundogan, both mid-30s. You've got Bernardo Silva in his 30s. You've got John Stones, Kyle Walker, all the wrong side of 30. They've got a lot of players they need to replace right now. They've got this big, obviously, cloud hanging over them in terms of the Premier League 115 charges. So I think that they've taken their eye off the ball in the last couple of transfer windows. Other teams have caught up, and now the advantage they had, they've lost. So big clubs like Liverpool, Chelsea, Arsenal are now contending for titles. Who knows where Man United will go under Ruben Amorim? So I think this is the end of the City as we know it. They'll still compete, but I don't think they're going to be anything like as dominant. I think if another team wins a title this year, then they'll fall even further back. So, yeah, this is the end of the era of glory. I don't think they can replicate what they've done before because, there's too many miles on the clock of the players and on Pep Guardiola.
Do you agree with that,
Rob? Don't show that ever again.
Do you agree with that, Rob? Is it a case of, right, when we move on and you're going to spend a lot more of your time at Edgeley Park as Stockport get all this millions from some random investor, and that's where you spend most of your time, all of that in Old Trafford? Or
I've learned never to write City off. It'll be interesting to see what the squad looks like on February the 1st. They're clearly not having a great time of it, and Mark is right that injuries are one thing, but a lot of their experienced players, Kyle Walker, De Bruyne, Gundogan, are not performing. But all the indications are that City are going to spend relatively heavily in January. It would be interesting to see what the squad looks like on February 1st, because the one thing that we know that City have managed to do over the last few years is to put long winning runs together at the back end of the season. And one of the kind of the side issues of a title race, maybe with a load of teams in there who we weren't expecting, like Liverpool and Chelsea and Arsenal faltering just a little bit, is that it's not done and dusted yet. And I'm sure, Pep Guardiola will tell all of the press in every news conference that they're not title challengers, that they can't think about big targets. The target is to score one goal and to win one game, because that's where they are right now. But behind the scenes, he will be telling those players that there is still a chance for them to have a very, very successful season. It would not surprise me if City were there or thereabouts come the end of the season. And you've also in a Champions League where anything can happen. The best team in Europe doesn't always win the Champions League.
That's true. And the only way to end this is with Stevie Nicol, because we have a tie. We have Mark Ogden saying the dynasty's over. It's forget about it. It's Pep's done. They're all over 30. They're all pipes and slippers. Rob's like, yep, they'll be title contenders. They're going to spend big in January. So it's like a boxing. We've got a split decision here. Stevie Nicol. If Liverpool, I've got to word this different because I'm going to say Liverpool win the title. No. If Liverpool finish above Manchester City, do they win the title?
Possibly not. No, I don't. I'm a little older than you lot, and I don't think anybody would say that in season 1986-87, everybody said that Liverpool's era was over as well. They had a bang average season under Kenny. Teams weren't scared to come and play us. And then the next 2 or 3 seasons after that, we retooled and got back to where we were. So, listen, this is a horrendous spell for Man City. I don't think you can turn around and say that it's the end. They're having a tough time. They have the finances to retool the same way that Kenny Dalglish did in 87, and we turned around and signed Barnsley and Beardsley, Aldridge, Houghton, and that team turned into one of the best sides that's ever played in English football. So I think it's a little premature, Augie. I'm afraid I'm going to go with Rob.
Yeah, but just on that, Steve, you're right. But how old are you in 85, 86, or 86, 87? Mid-20s?
You would be 26,
How long
27.
ago, I can't remember.
Yeah, so that's the point is that team that you talk about had a lot of younger players in the mid-20s who could go again. This is probably like your Liverpool team of 1990, when you had you and Alan Hansen, a lot of players that had been in the 30s.
And it's who you sign. It's definitely, listen, Liverpool Souness went and signed a lot of players, and it turned out that they weren't as good as the ones they were replacing. That's just the bottom line.
Matthias Nunes.
And so then that era was over. Then because of that, you say the era is over. I just think it's too early. The fact that they've had a horrendous 6-month spell. Yes, they got some players that are a little older than they would like. But again, when you've got the finances that they have and the Pep stays, the lure of him being the manager, I just think it's too early to say it's the era. It's an end of an era, because they could retool and go on and win the Premier League next season.
We started off with United today, and then we moved on to City. Marcus Rashford couldn't do similar, could he? Bye for now.
No.